do see that we have I see that we have some newish faces. Do we mind doing an introduction for some people?
Definitely. Thank you, Xavier. So first of all, I would like to introduce myself. I am Mrityunjay Sharma, and I am a junior year computer science engineering student at JSS Academy of Technical Education, Noida, India. And currently, I am interning at CNCF Kubernetes with the LFX mentorship. So my spring mentorship is about to end, and I have previously also contributed as a GSOC student last year to RTMS, and this year I'm glad that the community has accepted my application, and I would be contributing as a GSOC student to Buildpacks as well. So just wanted to express my gratitude and thanks to the entire community, to everyone, for such a warm uh, in onboarding, and for always answering my queries so well by everyone, whether it is Joe, Anthony, or anyone from the community. Thank you so much. That was my part.
Awesome. And what project is it that you're working on?
Building basically GitHub actions for automating the staging test. I'm sharing the repository. Just give me a moment.
I see. Cool. Nice. Welcome.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
All right. Does anybody else want to go?
Hi, I'm going next, and I'm Himantika Mitra, and I'm really thankful to Mrityunjay to introduce me to this community, and he has spoken to me in volumes about how good this community is, how interactive and helpful everyone is. He has mentioned all the names that even before being a part of the community, I was well aware of everyone, so I'm thankful to him that way. And I have also interacted with Xavier over Slack, and I had also applied to the LFX mentorship that he is a mentor at. And I'm currently a final year engineering student, and I'm also interning at Microsoft as a support engineer. Apart from that, I have worked with cloud and also low code platforms like Power Platform. And I always wanted to get started with open source, and I think that this was the start that I am trying to give, or the push that push has been given to me by Mrityunjay. So yeah, I'm really grateful and thankful that I could make it to today's call. I've been wanting to attend the call for a really long time, but since it gets a bit late here, I'm always not able to make it. But yeah, I'm glad that I could make it today and meet all of you. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, welcome. And hopefully, you know, what you hear, the good stuff you hear at least, is something that we could prove out. Yeah.
I hope the same.
All right. Let's see. So without further ado, I guess is the first topic done, or is there more you'd like to say?
No, it's done. Thank you so much again. And I've shared the project, and I'm sharing the proposal that I proposed to solve that project as well. Just to give you a moment. So definitely later on after this meeting or sometime, I would definitely like other community members also to, if they want to review or suggest any opinions about the project, definitely all the suggestions are welcome. Thank you so much. The first agenda is done. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And I did hear, kind of tie this into the whole mentorship side of things. I did hear that we might want to do like a quick little virtual social at some point with all the mentees and mentors. So hopefully that's something that we could get done here soon, and, you know, get to know each other a little bit more, right?
Thank you. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Cool. All right, let's see. Moving on, we've got a couple items, it looks like here, bomb related. I'm going to assume this is Sam. Is that right? Okay.
I just wanted to ping people if they have time to look at both of those discussions. I think the bomb one, I believe someone from VMware was supposed to make an RFC. I don't know them though. And the other one was the detect API stuff that we've talked a bunch of times. Anyone?
So is it Nisha who we're discussing? Okay. Interesting. I don't have a, like, I could contact her, but I'm not sure if anybody else was following up on that.
I think Steven was maybe.
I get the impression that nobody was following up on that, and we should either reach out and restart that conversation or get someone else to sign up to make the RFC.
Okay. That's interesting. All right, so yeah, so she recommended SPDX, right? And then I don't know, I feel like we've gone somewhat in circles about deciding which one. Is that like, has there been a more definitive answer other than just random recommendations?
I think everyone's thrown their 2 cents in, right? I feel like this comment is actually the exact inverse of why I would have made a argument for Cyclone DX, which is, I think Cyclone DX has room for more types of fields and it could be converted to SPDX. I don't know how easy it is to convert SPDX to Cyclone DX. I know that Cyclone DX has tools for converting to SPDX.
So, sorry, go ahead, Sam.
No, I had a similar impression that Cyclone DX had both the tooling and the data to be converted into SPDX. It also has better integrations and tools out of the box that generate bombs for you for specific languages. So like it already supports Python, Go, Ruby, PHP, like most of the main languages that both Paketo and Heroku target. So that was like one of the driving factors for me to consider that, because that would be easy to integrate with our existing like popular languages that existing Buildpacks support. And it also has like there seems to be a tool / open source scanner that ties in this SBOM with CVEs, so that like OWASP maintains some open source database that can scan these SBOMs generated by these tools and then flag potential CVEs for you. So looks like in terms of ecosystem, from what I could find, Cyclone DX had better integrations. SPDX may have them. It was just harder for me to find the relevant tools.
So without jumping to the conclusion, or I guess my suggestion, I know VMware has some internal like processes in the works right now. I think, Emily, you've been a part of those that talk about trying to get a bill of materials for scanning purposes at different layers or levels. Has there been any finding that should kind of push us in any direction, either away from SPDX for more versatility or to SPDX for compatibility or whatnot?
Yeah. Just to give some background here, like we use cloud native build packs in our tools, and we would like a bill of materials for images that we're building. I think right now from our side, the folks that want to consume that bill of materials actually want it in SPDX, but I don't think that we should use that to make the decision for the what's best for the project, especially if it's easy to convert. But I do think being able to convert to SPDX, I would see as a requirement.
Right.
But it seems like an easy requirement to meet.
To satisfy, yeah. All right, so then I guess that leads me to my recommendation is, well, I guess maybe I should ask, is there already an RFC for this? Because I see the discussion, but I don't think there's an RFC for this, right? So I guess my recommendation would be, should we just start with an RFC that proposes Cyclone DX and kind of specifies a lot of the stuff that you've mentioned, Sam, about integration and, you know, also the transformation or translation capabilities to SPDX to satisfy that need. But then we could talk about its benefits and values as to why we would want to choose it. And I think that would give us a lot more concrete data to actually make that decision final.
I think what we're missing in terms of being able to move forward is just somebody to own it. But now that Steven's here, he can answer the question that we couldn't without him, which is, Sam said that you had mentioned that there was someone else at VMware who was maybe looking into submitting a bomb RFC. Is that true or untrue?
Maybe. Let me.
Least helpful of the two answers.
Was this on GitHub somewhere or in Slack?
Yeah, there's a discussion that's linked in the agenda here.
Sorry, I just joined and don't have the agenda open even.
Nisha K from VMware.
Yes. She, a long time ago, she said that she might be interested in opening an RFC about it. She's a maintainer of Turn, just like a tool for generating SPDX formatted things, if that makes sense. So I can check in with her and see if she's still, it's been long enough that I wouldn't, I wouldn't guess that she's still working on it if she hasn't opened anything yet, but I can double check. Yeah, and I don't know that she has a driving force yet, right? Like as to why she would want it. And I think some internal stuff, but basically, I think I agree. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, personally, I don't think I could take it on my plate, although I do find it very interesting. So are there any volunteers for owning it? Sam, do you care about it?
I do care,
to run it through.
but I'll try to make an RFC if I can by the next week. If I can't, we should find someone to drive this forward.
Something I'm not opposed to as well is working through something like HackMD as a more collaborative, fluid way of piecing stuff together. And I could probably tack on some information onto a document like that versus, like a branch and PR and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I don't know, like I'm just giving you my, perception that if you create a HackMD and just share it, I might add a couple of things here and there. Cool. All right. Anything else on that topic? I think there were two lumped together.
And the other one was the detection limitations, which last time I proposed that we would resolve phase for. I don't know if anyone had any thoughts on that, or should I just put that concretely somewhere and we can discuss it then? I know the other alternative was that reference thing where one Buildpacks requirements could reference another Buildpacks. Sorry, the metadata could reference another Buildpacks metadata, and we would pick the first one and leave it at that.
Yeah, that was the best I could come up with, and I have not really thought about it since then. I feel like we need to find some more people to turn some of these things into RFCs.
Right. Yeah.
I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, not just volunteer to do them all, because I feel like my track record on the things I've already volunteered to do is a little spotty because there's a lot of things to do.
So I know at least for these two, they're discussions, I think. I do wonder if the discussions end up in a place where we do want an RFC to kind of be the outcome, if like an issue would be the next appropriate step, right? Like not a full commitment of producing the RFC, but at least a log of like this RFC would be nice to have.
Was there opening issues on the RFC repo? We can maybe attach like a wanted label or something and spam them out to people we think are interested and see if anyone wants to pick one up.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody comes by and says, why isn't, you know, the bomb spec'd out? Like, oh, well, we thought about it. Here's the issue. Do you want to like build it out? So yeah, I mean, that sounds like that might be a way to go about it, Sam. Like these discussions don't seem like there's any real opposition to it. They just need a little bit more driving force, and that might just be the next step. Sound good? Cool. All right. Moving on to cosign image signing.
Yeah, this was also something I wanted to bring up as something that's been gaining traction recently. We got a couple of questions about it during KubeCon. KPAC recently had an RFC about adding cosine support, and also the author Dan Loreng has reached out to us on PAC's issues if he can provide help integrating cosine with PAC. He's also reached out on the KPAC side to help with integrations or any advice. The benefits I see with cosine is one that it only requires an OCI registry and a couple of keys um, to do the actual signing. So it should actually be fairly simple to integrate. It's not uh, it's not like this and Notary are uh, like in competition with each other. They're complementary, and I think we should invite Dan to one of the office hours to explain that part, because that's something that I've had a hard time figuring out, like where you would want to use, like how they are actually complementary. From what I can see, it may have to do with key rotations, like the keys that we use to sign your certificates. Maybe those are somehow handled by Tough, uh, and cosign just does the actual signing and verification. Not sure, but that's one point that I would love to have Dan over if he's willing to in office hours and like talk through what cosign offers over Notary. And yeah, I think it might also be uh, an easy thing. Well, not easy, but like a relatively dependency-free image signing option, because it doesn't require a separate database or a service. It just requires an image registry, which if you're building container images, you already have. Um, so that's my take on it. I think with all this SPOM stuff, we also need a way of making sure that like the SPOM is actually valid and trusted, and someone's not randomly like creating malicious SPOMs. So image signing would be a nice addition to something like PAC.
Yep, I see Anthony's hand is raised.
Yes. I guess I wanted to poke at you, Sam, about this. I was hoping to know if maybe at Bloomberg you'd seen sort of, requests for image signing directly and like a preference for cosign specifically, or any other thing. And the reason I'm asking is because, I know the notary investigation, or the investigation and the implementation itself was pretty much just someone thought it was a good idea, right? And I guess at this point, I want to be motivated by more than a good idea to do another image signing episode.
Do we already support Notary somewhere?
Like we don't have support for it, but it's something that could be tacked on to the workflow, right? Like there's not any need necessary for Buildpacks to have any real specific integration. But yeah, I think cosign works slightly different in that the lifecycle might have to produce both images, right? light, being like fuzzy, right? Yeah.
As for Bloomberg, I don't want to speak on behalf of the company. So
yeah. So would your team want images to be signed, right? Like
I
that
can
might
say
be
personally,
this
it would be
question.
nice to have images signed. And cosign seems like a nice option. That's all I can say.
Cool. Anybody else have opinions? Emily?
I agree that images should be signed and cosign is a nice option. Definitely seen users of KPAC and the VMware tools that use KPAC request this. It could always be added in at a different layer. I have to think about exactly where's the right place in the process to hook this in. But I think it's worth investigating, and it's something that a lot of people would want.
I would say we should at least reach out to Dan. Like, he's asked a couple of times on back issues that if we need his help, I think at least we can have him over and have him demo or explain some of these things.
Cool. I'd be down for that. I know I talked to Steven about cosign after a demo that we saw, because Notary V2 was something that we've talked about, I think last year or so, and we investigated, and it was, again, we came to the conclusion that it could be done at a different layer, I guess, to use Emily's remark. And so anyways, cosign does seem very lucrative to solve that problem, and very lightweight and simple, that I think it has a lot of value to it. So I personally would be, happy to see a more specific demo and being able to ask those sort of questions of how it ties into our solution. So Sam, I guess, unless there's any objections, right? Like, Sam, do you want to reach out and see if you could make it to an office hours?
Sure.
I think part of the framing for this, or the way I see this, is, not very many people like Notary V1. It's kind of, people are looking at Notary V2 and looking at cosign. Notary V2 looks really great in some ways and solves all the problems, and kind of also defines like a bill of materials format and many other, not a format, but a way of specifying that in the registry at least. But it seems like it might take a really long time to land, because it's a bunch of changes directly to the OCI spec. And so I think a lot of the interest in cosign isn't because people feel like Notary V2 is bad. I think people like it's much simpler than Notary V1, solves a bunch of problems. I think people want a solution much sooner. And I think cosign is trying to provide that solution and has a lot of community support. And so we can support Notary V2 in the future when it's ready, and we can support cosign now. And I think I'll probably make everybody happy. So I don't expect a lot of, or like, I kind of only see one path anyways, unless we're not going to support, cosign in the short term, right? The only other solution would be not do signing or adopt Notary V1, even though people don't like it, right? So
Notary V2 is defining a custom artifact format, right? Which then needs to get approved. But it's not just that spec needs to get approved, it's that, we try to work with every registry under the sun. So all the registries then need to implement support for the new formats. It's gonna be a really long time.
The good thing about cosign is that it also has a backwards compatibility mode. So it also works with purely Docker registries which don't even implement the full OCI spec. So I know registries where that may be the case. So that's.
Do we feel like there's a clear leader in the image signing game right now?
I think cosign came in and just like wowed everybody. And
Well,
now,
Exactly. What's stopping something else from doing that, 6 months from now?
I think it depends on the time frame you're thinking about. The right now there's Notary V1. Notary V1 has a lot of complexity and a lot of restrictions that make it unusable in some use cases, right? So people are, there's like a lot of agreement that we need something else, right? Notary V2 looks great, but it requires changes to so many things that, I hope it lands and everybody's really happy in the future when it gets adopted everywhere, they can switch to it, but it's going to take a long time. And then in the short term, there's only one alternative that's being proposed, and it does have seemingly a lot of community support behind it, which is cosign. So like, could some people decide that there's another short-term solution? Maybe. Could people put down Notary V2 in the long run and say, actually, there's another long-term solution that people like, that it seems possible, because there are definitely opinions in Notary V2 that, where people disagree, or definitely decisions in Notary V2 that have been made where people disagree. So, I mean, it's possible that something else pops up, but right now it doesn't seem to be a lot of, path forward, if that makes sense, besides cosign.
and I mean, part of me wonders like whether or not there'd be room for more than just one signing mechanism, right? Like, I think of it very similar to maybe how we currently support Daemon, which we might agree is not the best. But then there's other formats that we'd want to support, like OCI layout upcoming, maybe, and then registry, right? Like, we didn't settle for just one and say like, oh, you have to like deal with this one method. And I would think that if there are different signing mechanisms, right? Being able to configure and choose what makes the most sense for your problem or solution, yeah, then you should be able to choose that, right? And so that's more like looking forward. But again, cosign is kind of taking off, so it makes the most sense to incorporate it if it makes sense on a technical side.
I do wonder if this makes it better as a platform concern rather than a life cycle concern. So that as things evolve, we don't always have to keep pushing support for a variety of things in the life cycle. The life cycle can do its one job, and then platforms can have more opinionated integrations with different types of signing.
Yep.
This also kind of brings back to the point I raised last time, which is like life cycle extensions, which is things you want to try out, but not necessarily maintain in the long term. And it would be nice to have that as like an add-on, so that like you have 4 different platforms, all of them don't have to implement the same thing. You could tack on this extension to the life cycle, and then everyone now has image signing support.
I think that would have been really nice for something like Stack Buildpacks, right? As opposed to like an experimental API, which I think is maybe what's supported right now, like an extensions interface or contract might have been better suited there. But this is like me
I think we
spitting
went
or thinking
over
out loud. Yeah.
all those options in depth, right? I think what makes it harder for Stackpacks in something like signing or a prepare phase is that it's so deeply embedded in all of the other logic and requires a bunch of changes to the core logic to make things work. Like, we're gonna reorder the phases and do a bunch of other things, which I think makes it a bit inappropriate for an extension. It's not just one extra thing that's happening. It's like we need to re-architect a bunch of stuff in order to make this possible.
But
I was
something like
going to, sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was going to propose the alternative, right? If like life cycle becomes so quote unquote basic that its concerns are more or less very tightly bound to just executing the phases and not so much providing support for, X integration, then we could provide like tooling, platform specific tooling, right? Instead of baking everything into Pack, like just providing small bits and pieces that Pack itself consumes, but you could also integrate into other platforms like Tecton, PackOrb, and so on.
That's the way I would like to model it, I think.
I think we draw a distinction, like there's a need to keep the life cycle modular and small and, like just doing one thing relatively well, right? We've even broken the life cycle down into parts that, are well defined. But I think that makes us try to make a decision between, does this feature go in Pack or the life cycle? When the real answer is, the life cycle can have other packages that aren't core to it. We can make other repos that, platforms can import. I think we have a wide range of options between those things. It might be interesting to figure out if those are other things for the lifecycle subteam or implementation subteam versus something else when they come out, but it seems like this will be good discussions.
I know, at least in the Pack repo, Jesse's brought up the idea of like being able to download Buildpacks, right? Like that functionality seems to be necessary in a lot of different platforms. And so I think we're working through that as, through experimentation to figure out exactly how to externalize that functionality into something that others can consume. And that kind of ties into the package refactor that we'll be doing in Pack, that hopefully at some point will spit out, functionality in some way or form or fashion.
I think it also keeps the API compatibility stuff simpler. If this is sort of like some of these things like, transforming project TOML fields into inputs to the lifecycle phases are a platform concern. Because then as a platform, you can say, I support these versions of the project descriptor API. And if you as a platform would like to support these versions, you can use our setup image, but the lifecycle itself doesn't need to say like, I support these project descriptors and this Buildpack API, and this platform API, and this distribution API. Like it'd be nicer to not try to mediate that all in one place, probably. Especially if platform is going to have to interact with some of those components anyways.
What I like is that like we already have the lifecycle as separate binaries, whether they're symlinked or not is a separate case. But like if we could provide more binaries where platforms could just insert them between phases. And so like, let's say you provide a binary that does project descriptor parsing and modifications to the app directory based on that, or other things that could just be a separate binary or a library, I guess, go in this case because that's what the rest of the project is implemented in. And that way, platforms that don't want to consume it as a library can just put that binary in front of the other lifecycle binaries and run that phase. Like, so for example, this cosine thing could be an extension to the export phase, which you just run after the export binary. And then we could define the API for these extensions. So like how the lifecycle API has certain inputs and stuff defined, we could have that these are certain lifecycle extensions that platforms may choose to use. And like, here's the input, here's the expected output. And the lifecycle or the platform team, depending on where it falls, could maintain that.
Yeah, I think the way that you describe it to me seems like something that's already possible and that doesn't necessarily need any like life cycle contract or additional life cycle contract, right? Because that contract already exists, and we technically even right now could add a cosine, binary that executes after the fact. If, again, very hypothetical, if we export to OCI layout, right, and then all of a sudden we have this additional binary that then is able to take this OCI layout, sign it, and put it into its final registry, like that doesn't necessitate a spec change, right? Like that's a platform implementation concern, and Pack could do it, or any other platform could do something similar.
I think the reason I wanted it as an extension spec is that, let's say, the lifecycle, like the platform API changes and the outputs from, or the inputs to the lifecycle now change. Like I want there to be like something that says that, okay, this is compatible with this API, and if you want to support future APIs, like some team can add support for that using like taking a look at that spec or something. I don't know if that makes sense. Like if some other organization wants to implement their own prepare phase, they can look at, like, here's what the lifecycle expects the prepare extension to look like. Here's my implementation of it if I don't want to implement it in Go or whatever. I don't know if that's something we want to go through the effort of doing, or whether it's just like some random tooling we provide, which is not spec'd out.
Is there anything else here besides the, like, literally the cosine binary that you'd run after the life cycle? Like, because is
There's
there
the prepare phase that you'd run before, and I think that's another example, right, Sam?
I mean, like after it exports, after the exporter, like life cycle is running a bunch of binaries running in order, right? After the exporter runs and exports the image, is there a binary that we would actually need to create that would have its own interface, or is it literally what a
For
platform just
example, this resolve thing that I was talking about, this resolve phase, which could be experimental, you could say, takes the output from like the detect phase, makes and runs this this resolve binary from the lifecycle, which in turn runs the resolve binaries in the build packs, modifies the output so that the next, like the analysis phase, has the right input for the rest of the execution. So like a lot of these things that we talk about as experimental things we want to try out between phases, we could just plug it in, see if it works out. If it doesn't, then we just get rid of it.
oh, we're talking about integration? Did that-
Sorry?
we were talking about cosine integration.
No. I thought I was like describing other use cases for inserting binaries.
No, that makes sense. I just misunderstood.
I guess the part I've never thought about, right, is like this prepare phase, or this like signing binary that the platforms are providing, whether those would be things that necessitate a spec, or if they would just be additional utilities. I think that's a really interesting question. Or would they be extension specs similar to project descriptor?
I like the idea of them being utilities in a way.
But is there, I guess, is there a clear distinction to answer that? Like, other than just like, we don't want to either take on the burden of speccing these out, or like there's value in just making them utilities. Like, I guess why project descriptor, or why the builder are extension specs, right? But these other utilities like the prepare phase or signing phase wouldn't be extension specs.
What makes it feel different to me is that you need, in order for the whole life cycle to do its job of being a compatibility layer between platforms and build packs, you really need to, as a version of the platform, know that if you're pulling in a newer lifecycle and you set what version of the platform API you want, you can always expect your inputs and outputs in the same format. When I'm thinking about some of these extensions, like maybe this resolve phase would be the exception to that, but the two we were talking about before, like the prepare and the signing, I could see as only interacting with the platform API, or only interacting with the platform. So you can always be, you can just ship a version of that with your platform that matches your platform's expectation and like evolve it on your own. You don't need this guarantee that you can always pull in newer ones so that you can run newer build packs. And then we can give people ones and they can use our interface if they want to. But I can think of there's a wider variety of things people are going to want to do. Like maybe they got a different signing mechanism. Maybe they don't want to enable some features in Project Toml. So there's just a greater diversity in options people want to pass. And you can bundle it with the platform itself, so it's not as important that it adheres to a rigid API.
Yes, like things like prepare and sign are exceptions because they come at the beginning or the end. As soon as you insert something in the middle, you would need a spec or an API that it conforms to. Otherwise,
I feel like it's only true if it's interacting with build packs, because each phase in the lifecycle has its own API. So, maybe detect makes outputs that it expects analyze to take right now. But if you went and munge those outputs and change their values, as long as it's still in the same format, analyze can still take it.
because like resolve is one example. The other example I can think of is that cleanup phase that we've talked about a lot of times that runs after the build packs. That could be inserted after the build phase and before export. So like I can think of other examples where people want something and we're not sure about it 100% that we want to bloat the life cycle with it. So at the same time, we want.
If a build pack's using it though, like with the cleanup stuff, I feel like it falls less into the category of an optional extension, because like, does this build pack need it in order to execute accurately? And then who turns on and off the extension,
So I think that's the other part I was thinking, like the build pack itself would say that here's an extension that's defined in the spec and I want that. And that, if that makes sense, that makes.
So is that really an extension? Like if we have to guarantee that when the build pack asks for an extension, it gets it, isn't that just a feature of the spec that some build packs use and some don't? It's not really an extension at that point, right? Because it's not optional.
I guess the only difference would be that the build pack can just be excluded if it doesn't find that. Your build still wouldn't, like your detect and build wouldn't fail. It's just that build pack would be excluded from the build process if the dependencies don't match up, your detect or build fails.
If like it's asking for something and we can't run it, and like it's not available.
It's similar to mixins in that sense. Like if it can't find it, it won't run. But you can still put it there.
I feel like then you run the risk of creating more situations where things can't be interoperable, right? And then like, do you version these extensions with the build pack API? Do we have to support what the extension looks like for a variety of APIs? I think it starts to get complicated. Like in some ways, I almost feel like we have too many APIs and the compatibility is getting really hard now that we want to make bigger changes. There's some that I wish we could collapse. It's like, is Builder API really just like part of platform API, just a way to distribute platform API things? Like, what about distribution? Is that also part of platform? Is that part of build pack? Like, could we do the same thing with fewer numbers? Because right now we have these overlaps with the same assumptions. basically need to be in specs that are supposed to be orthogonal. So it makes it hard to change one without changing the other. And it worries me if we introduce like what is supposed to be like an orthogonal concept of an extension, then we're just going to create a world of pain for ourselves.
I think what we need is a way to test out these things without guaranteeing that we will support them forever, and being able to test them out in relatively quickly, then changing the life cycle itself, and then digging ourselves deeper into the maintenance hole.
That's why binaries that we ship that you can run before or after that aren't spec'd feel like a great lightweight way to test things out. In terms of things that are more tightly integrated that you can't just tack on the end or in the beginning. Like I'm pretty sure we approved an RFC that included like experimental features within an API. It could just be bundled with an API version, but notated in a way that makes it obvious that you can't count on it existing forever. But as long as we support that API version, we will support it. It just might not exist in future API versions. So it's not orthogonal.
Yeah.
Our facilitator had networking issues and has left us. We want to keep talking about extensions or move on to the next thing?
I think one last comment. Alternatively, what we could do is, rather than providing extensions in the life cycle, we could provide them in back instead, where users could tack on a binary and tell back to execute it. So that can make for some quick, lightweight proof of concepts.
That would make a lot of sense to me. I think that'd be cool.
Yeah. Do you want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, Buildpack TOML repackage.
So this is a use case that I think I can best explain with Paketo, because that is one example of Buildpacks that are modular enough and are Buildpack TOML driven. That this makes sense. So most of the Paketo Buildpacks, which are providing some sort of a binary or a tarball, have the structure where they say, this is the version of the binary, this is the source, this is the build distribution that I'm going to install, and a couple of other things like that. So that's distributing assets. The other thing that they specify is the stack IDs. And the last thing, which they currently don't, but I think would be a useful addition, is that along with these different tarballs, if you could specify environment variables, which can be overridden, that for example, things like setting the pip index URL or your Go proxy. So
you can do this in the Java ones. There's a section for configuration and you can set default values. But it's not like passing the environment variable to future things. It's more like, here's an environment variable that I as a build pack accept. But if you don't pass it, here's the default value.
Yeah, I mean, even having that ability would be great, because as an operator, then rather than having the app developer trying to figure out, like, this is the environment variable I need to set for my entire organization, this is the tarball that I'm using in my organization, or this is the stack I'm using in my organization. Rather than like using something like bindings to configure all of that, if you could repackage the original build pack so that the functionality remains the same, but you essentially replace these things with their equivalents or mirrors, so to say. You have a build pack that you can essentially mirror and at the same time reuse without additional configuration from the app developer side. So it's like a one-time change on the operator, and the app developer doesn't have to do much. The other thing I want to get at is, like, this in general seems like a good idea for build packs. Like, I know we have discussed like having more metadata in the build pack toml that decides things like deprecation dates, which also makes it easier to extract bombs from the build pack. So I know, like, the Paketo ones, for example, take the dependency and can output that as a bomb. As well as being able to say that here are the environment variables that I can that configure the specific build pack. So all of this metadata, if we expose it in the build pack toml, the platform can parse it, the registry can parse it. We can provide a better user experience to the app developers, because things that used to be opaque because they can't actually inspect the build pack toml because you don't know what the structure is, now become transparent to the user, because they can see, okay, here are the environment variables, here are the default values, here is where it's getting its Go distribution from. It's not some random website, some sketchy website on the internet, but something that I trust. Or like, I think just having this level of configuration and transparency would make it a better experience for both operators and app developers. I mean, this is not something we should add to the spec, but maybe as like one of those best practices section, like, hey, you're a build pack author trying to do all of these things, maybe consider making your build pack more config driven. Then maybe a platform like Pack can provide additional capabilities to repackage this so that it's easier to reuse.
I feel like some of the stuff we've sort of tried out in the metadata section of Buildpack toml for Paketo Buildpacks could be elevated to a spec level, like listing configuration values and their defaults, because then you could, have tie-ins to documentation tools in Pack or something like that. For some of these things, I worry that, or I just wonder if there's a better answer than editing Buildpack toml, like to take them one by one. The stack ID thing, I definitely understand why you want to do that. There are times I want to do that, but I think it's because we've modeled stack IDs wrong. Like, the build pack should be able to describe what images it can run on, in a way that doesn't make you want to do this. For the asset locations, like, have you read through the RFC about asset packages? I'm wondering if that actually does already solve that use case.
I should take a look at that. I've not read through it in detail.
It's I'll provide the link. It's only for sort of like vendored assets. So you can you could vendor in assets from different locations into like a offline version of the build pack using this utility.
From skimming through it, I assumed it was more like you want an offline build pack where you don't want to download stuff from the internet. So you put that with the build pack image itself, and then instead of downloading it, it will see if it's there and it will pull that in. Is that what it is?
Yes. And that's one of its big motivations, is that you'd be pulling assets locally and not spending time downloading it. So you can relocate it to an air-gapped environment or something like that if you want to. But the way it works, how when you put the final build pack together, you sort of can combine a build pack package and an asset package to make an offline package. Like you could, those could be your own assets, right? It doesn't have to.
There are a couple of issues with that. One, you package all of this into the builder. So whoever is using it has to download all of these assets, even if they're not using that specific language. So like with, let's say you have the entire slew of the Pacato Java build packs and you're not even using Java. But let's say you want to provide a consistent build experience where you have one builder that can be used for all of these apps. You now have this huge builder that each user has to download, even though they're not using all these other languages. That was why I was not sold on the idea of including everything in the build pack, because
it was definitely a drawback. Like you could maybe get around it with like the eStartZ lazy polling something, but that doesn't work in vanilla Docker, I'm pretty sure. Like you'd have to use containerd directly. So yes, I think there's still a case for getting the same asset from a different URL. But I worry that if you can just edit, like, could that be solved by some sort of better convention for configuring these build packs? Because I worry if you could just edit anything in the build pack topple, like there's no guarantee that that build pack is going to run correctly afterwards. Like you don't know how much those assumptions are baked into the build pack, and it's not guaranteed to be a thing that is supported, right?
I think we base a lot of assumptions, or like based on the fact that users will gun themselves, like they'll do some things wrong, and we want to protect them against those things.
A little overly paternalistic sometimes. Like if it breaks, well, tough luck, you edited it. Don't edit it wrong next time.
I mean, as an operator, I believe it should, like if you're going through the effort of doing all of this, I would imagine the least an operator could do is verify that the build packs they're editing and redistributing to their users work. I don't think we should be stopping them from doing it. That's how I think. Like if being overly cautious of some use cases where users who don't know it could potentially use it incorrectly, I think that's a far-fetched idea, because as it is, people find build packs complex. If someone has gone through the effort of doing all of this, I would assume they know at least something like what they're doing, or they may have tested it. So that's my assumption, that if they're already doing it regardless, and it, like, let's say the bindings use case that Pacato currently provides, what's stopping you from providing incorrect values for those bindings? I guess in that case, it falls back.
Which ones? Like the asset bindings?
Yeah.
It's going to check the digest of whatever it pulls, right? So
that was my other use case. Like currently, it assumes those Cloud Foundry tarballs and it calculates the digest off of them. Maybe they have some additional Cloud Foundry data, which the build pack doesn't need, but it's just like metadata generated by the Cloud Foundry build process. And my digest isn't the same, but I know it's roughly the same thing. Yeah.
there's a lot to think about here, and I'm late for the next thing. I'd be worried about sort of like I think you need to at least be able to explicitly set the digest in that case. You can't just download whatever, right? And assume it's the thing you want. I'm sorry, I'm late. Oh, we'll come back to this one.
Yes.
Have a good one, everybody.